Welcome to week 3 of our lecture in EDS 652. This week is a little more resource reading heavy and lecture heavy because we're talking about the history of special education for a little bit, and then moving on to the laws, regulations, both federal and state, that govern what we do in classrooms every day to help all children learn. I wanted to quickly start out, and there's just 2 slides dedicated to history. It's a tough subject. It's not easy to read about. Not all of us really find nonfiction or history interesting, but there are some of us that do. So for those of you that do, I'm going to encourage you to dig a little deeper. But for the basis of our course, we need to know where we've been so that we know where we're going. When you know better, you do better. So I'm just going to give you a quick less than 5-minute overview, and then there's a chart on the next page or the next slide that we'll talk about. First of all, if you did order a copy of Demystifying Disability, Chapter 3 has what our author calls a very incomplete history of disability advocacy and rights. Emily Ladau does an amazing job of talking through kind of the timeline of what happened in our documentary of last week with Crip Camp, and then moving on into even more current needs and issues. Then we also have a timeline of what started as the civil rights movement and moved into the history of special education. Again, we need to know where we've been so we can know where we're going. Special education started in Brown versus the Board of Education, which is the infamous desegregation case where students of color were being segregated and removed and educated separately. When that was found to be unconstitutional, disability rights activists said, hey, wait a minute, it's the same for our students with disabilities. And our history moves forward from there. If you've got a minute, or if you've got a second screen up and you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide, there's a timeline from 1954 from that court case through 2015, which was our last major new revamping of federal law, and it's called the Every Student Succeeds Act. I am using a book from another text, a text from another course, The Essentials of Special Education Law. Not something that we needed to dive into for this course, but I'm using it as a resource. That chart has been modified and summarized for you on the next slide and gives you a really good overview of where we've been for special education. In order to keep in mind our current needs, I need to give you a little bit of a history primer, a history lesson, probably from your government classes out of this book. And we just need to remember that there are 4 types of law. The most broad comes from the U.S. Constitution. We talked about Brown versus Board of Education, the desegregation case being found unconstitutional. That's the broadest sense of our law. And it's hard, other than that case, to really draw special education back to that. Then we get to statutory law, and statutory law is passed by the legislative branch, by Congress in Washington, D.C., and that's kind of what you think of when you think of law. Then we have regulatory law, and then that's when a statutory law is passed. Regulatory law is how we're going to carry that law out. This is really, really connected to special education because we have regulations that we're going to talk about this week that we must follow, both federal and state, in order to provide services for students with special education. And then the last type of law is called case law. And when there is a disagreement or something that's not clear about statutory and regulatory law, someone takes issue, takes it to court, and then it goes all the way up to circuit court or sometimes Supreme Court, and they issue a statement, and that becomes case law. That becomes kind of the new regulations, the clarified regulations that schools follow to make sure all students can learn. As you look through these next slides, keep in mind the timeline on the next slide, where we've been, what has established our statutory law, our regulatory law, and you'll see I've also included cases for direct application of those laws. This is, again, a brief history of where we've been. If you're more interested, I've used 2 or 3 resources for you to dig into, and I've got lots more. So you can contact me, and I'd be happy to give you more about the history of our profession.